Far more confidence in those than any...
While he'd been a TD for 8 years, Brian Cowen's public profile was low when Albert Reynolds replaced Charlie Haughey as leader of Fianna Fáil and Taoiseach in 1992.
Point out to you that our Taoiseach has just joined us at the workshop.
But it was a sign of Cowen's closeness to the Longford men that he was chosen to give the warm-up speech. By the end of that weekend, Brian Cowen had entered into Irish political folklore.
Should I say something about the PDs? Well, if in doubt, leave them out.
Well, it's extraordinary that a cabinet minister could speak about his coalition of cabinet colleagues like he did about the PDs. If in doubt, leave them out. But of course, he says a lot more blistering things in private.
Will it be Fine Gael under the leadership of bumbling Mr. Bruton as it stumbles from crisis to calamity? A party whose Ardeshina have descended from wearing the blue shirt to telling the blue joke.
That is his view, and that's the way he expresses it.
Albert Reynolds is the man we have chosen to lead us. Albert Reynolds is the man who will lead us to victory in the next election. Albert Reynolds is the man who will harness the enthusiasm that's palpable in this House tonight to give us the overall majority that we want and that we're going to have after the next election. Albert Reynolds is the man who's going to win us the next general election. I give you Albert Reynolds.
There was a special relationship between himself and Albert Reynolds. Albert Reynolds plucked him off the backbenches at a time when I think he needed to be taken off the backbenches. And he sees Albert as a kind of father figure, is remarkably loyal to him. Got highly emotional on a public television programme about what he called the 10-22 agreement when Dick Spring withdrew from the Albert Reynolds government.
You and your Fianna Fáil colleagues will not sacrifice Albert Reynolds.
There is no reason whatsoever to sacrifice Albert Reynolds. He has explained in total tonight or today and yesterday the oversight that took place. And I would make this simple point. I would appeal to the common sense of Irish people simply as this. This issue should not have dealt a destruction to this good government. You've got to keep a sense of proportion here. We're talking
This was Brian Cowen at his most passionate, defending a man whom he believed had been seriously wronged. But not only had Reynolds not achieved the elusive overall majority for Fianna Fáil, he found himself to the amazement of everyone in coalition with Labour. But that too came to grief. When Dick Spring walked, Bertie Ahern became his successor.
I've just appointed Bertie Ahern as my new Taoiseach.
Ahern was soon to become Reynolds' successor as party leader, but not as Taoiseach. That prize went to John Bruton. Bertie Ahern had to wait until 1997 to be elected Taoiseach. Once again, in coalition with the Progressive Democrats, Brian Cowen was made Minister for Health. Although he strenuously denied it, it was an open secret he wasn't happy.
There was a general feeling around that it was a punishment centre to be put into. I think for a while he began to be convinced that maybe that was the case, because he didn't feel that he had as much to offer in health as he would have in many other areas. And that's fair enough. Every minister would feel the same.
The nurses' strike was a major test for the government and the Minister for Health. In Tullamore, one of its leaders was on her union executive and an active member of Fianna Fáil.
As I recollect now, my feelings were, I had a lot of mixed feelings. Fear of the unknown, fear of what was going to happen, how everybody was going to stay committed to the strike, how we were going to, how the day would pan out, what it was going to be like for the patients that we had left inside in the hospital, how the cover was going to work out, how the nurses who were given their free time, how we were going to keep them motivated, keep them together. And I suppose just generalised fear of the unknown.
Do you think did the strike do him lasting damage here in Tullamore?
I suppose, like any strike, there's always winners and losers and there's always fallout. I suppose maybe a certain amount.
Have you spoken to him since?
Oh, I have met him on different occasions, yeah.
So you didn't feel that he was insensitive to you, or did you?
Maybe at times.
I think that he did come out of the nurses' dispute better than might have been predicted. I mean, he is, after all, a tough, decisive politician. Having said that, he wasn't a good Minister for Health, and I think that's puzzling. There were no great innovations or no big idea. There was no big idea while he was in Health. But he did come through the nurses' dispute, I think, remarkably intact.
To serve in government in any department is a challenge, and health certainly is a challenge, and I enjoyed my time there, despite the fact that I wasn't courting publicity, because I think there was a huge job to be done in there. And certainly when I took over, health department had been pulled apart, if you like, certainly in terms of its relationship with the media, in terms of the Hep C issues and all of that. So I think it was time to actually batten down and get focused back on the issues themselves.
Tom Feary's pub in Kilcormac in County Offaly is one place Brian Cowen is truly at home. With his own who brook no criticism of him, he lets the guard drop.
He's grumpy, but he's approachable. He's just straight. Brian Cowen appears to me as being just... He's Brian Cowen. He's no... Like, you meet him one day and he'll salute you and he'll say, oh, well, I know her, salute her. And you meet him the next day and he'll be with someone, or he'll be in the height of the talks in the north or something, and he'll be too busy to even think.
There's no beating about the bush. He won't tell you something that he thinks might suit you. He'll tell you what he'll tell it straight up as it is, you know, and that's what I like about him, in a politician and in an individual as well.
Do you think as he moved away from traditional Fianna Fáil?
I thought so in the beginning, but no, he hasn't. Not at all. As a matter of fact, he's more Republican than his late father was.
Now when I returned, oh my eyes, they are burned, to see how a town could be brought to its knees by the armoured cars and the bombed-out bars and the gas that hangs onto every breeze. Now the army's installed by that old gas yard wall, and the damn barbed wire is higher and higher. With their tanks and their guns, oh my God, what have they done to the town that I love so well?
Again, I would suggest that the parallel...
He describes himself as a traditionalist. He insists on the right to call himself a Republican. He refuses to cede the term to those who only see it in the context of armed struggle. At the British-Irish Association, he proclaims it as loudly as to the party faithful in Offaly, spelling out his views on nationalism and republicanism.
This is a debate which must continue. Nationalism, too, has been in a state of flux. Inevitably, some of its more idealistic and utopian aspirations proved impossible.
We believe that there is now a once-off opportunity to make sure that we leave the militant Republican tradition behind us.
Symbolic expression and protection. The peace process, with its emphasis on inclusivity, has changed the political dynamics of our situation. It has broadened how both unionism...
And in changing, not in abolishing, but in changing and modernising Articles 2 and 3 of our Constitution, we have said quite openly that constitutional republicanism is an accommodating tradition, that we want
to change the political dynamics of our situation. It has broadened how both unionism and nationalism are perceived and defined.
That the great political project for modern politics in Ireland in the 21st century was to effect reconciliation between the two traditions in Ireland.
And if Brian Cowen's views on the national question have evolved, so too have those of others.
Only through armed struggle, only through support from the Irish Republican Army will the Irish people of the 6 counties get what is rightfully theirs.
Martin McGuinness speaking at a commemoration for the 8 IRA men shot dead by the British Army during a raid on an RUC barracks in Loughgall. Now, less than 20 years later, he's Minister for Education.
The people who have led that struggle, the spearhead of that struggle, are the volunteer soldiers of the Irish Republican Army. We have spent most of today...
Who would have thought then we'd see the day the IRA would allow the inspection of their bunkers, such as this one in County Galway? and that they would agree to their weaponry and their explosives being put beyond use, and that fact being verified by independent international inspectors. The Hio flew to Belfast one morning a few weeks ago with Brian Cowen. Their mission was to meet Matti Ahtisaari of Finland and Cyril Ramaphosa from South Africa. Peter Mandelson was also there. It was a low-key affair. The meeting lasted about an hour, but the business was done. As the men parted, the decommissioning process had begun. At the height of the IRA's campaign, much of its armoury was supplied by Muammar Gaddafi. But when Bertie Ahern met the Libyan leader in Cairo in April, the issue was not discussed. While the Colonel was happy to be briefed on the North, the purpose of the meeting was to discuss trade, specifically the resumption of live cattle exports to the North African state. Both men thought they'd done a deal.
This is the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Libya. It's a country which has had a strained relationship with Ireland. Mad Dog Gaddafi, as Ronald Reagan called him, financed and armed the IRA and is still regarded by many as being an international terrorist leader. But the cattle trade to Libya was worth £25 million a year to Irish farmers when it was suspended. For the past 4 years, tough negotiations have been taking place to try and reinstitute it.
When Brian Cowen stepped onto the tarmac in Tripoli a few weeks later, he was the first Minister for Foreign Affairs to do so. He met the Libyan Prime Minister and his Foreign Minister. All seemed to be going to plan. The question of cattle imports had been elevated to the highest political level. A letter from the Taoiseach was handed over. It was at this level that guarantees could be given that trade would resume. But as ever, the devil was in the detail. When officials from the Department of Agriculture met their opposite numbers, problems arose. As the day came to an end in Tripoli, what was believed to be a done deal was in fact in tatters. That night, the Irish side piled on the pressure. Gaddafi was out of town, but his old revolutionary comrades were not. The following morning, the show was back on the road. First, there was the Foreign Minister. But Saeed Maibar and Abdulati Al-Abidi, Gaddafi's personal representatives, delivered the deal. A joint communique was agreed. Ireland would again be asked to tender for live cattle imports. There would also be beef tenders. The deal worth a potential £70 million. The first tenders for beef were invited last week. For Brian Cowen, it was quite a coup. But the North will remain a crucial part of the work of any Minister for Foreign Affairs for the foreseeable future. In May, Brian Cowen was still awaiting the result of that crucial waterfront meeting. Victory for David Trimble ensured politics will be put back in the ascendant.
Minister? Yes, Ray, how are you? Minister, I've got the result just come through. Trimble carried it. He got 459 votes in favour and 403 votes against. Works out about 53%. 53. So he's a margin of 6%. So, I mean, I think that's enough for him to move on.
Very good, Ray. Thanks for that.
Okay, Minister.
I'll come back to you.
All the best.
53-47.